Time for world politics. We'll be talking about a number of political things going on and all along those lines, including this notion that apparently Trump is talking about this notion of having a third term. He actually floated that idea out earlier today and all along those lines. So I've got Sasha Starr. We'll see who else joined us as well and see what folks have to see about this notion that he is tossing out there as a legitimate possibility, even though those people say that legally that is not possible whatsoever or is even able to be done. But apparently he did float that out there again on today being the 11th of February, and all along those lines. And of course, there's been this whole conversation around rare earth coming from Ukraine. And I know that Sasha talked about that earlier today as well, and all in that kind of space. So there's a number of things that Trump is doing, and we'll definitely be interested to see what folks have to say about these conversations and what they are. The ramifications of them are, and all along those lines. But definitely that was something that was floated and that was put out there, this notion of Trump being able to come up and have a third term. You know, no president has ever had a third term that I'm aware of, that I can remember, but we'll see what goes on in that space. And the judge orders the Trump administration to restore removed health agency websites. So health information wiped from the internet by Trump administration must be restored online, according to what a judge has said. So the judge orders the HHS, the CDC, and the FDA to restore their deleted web pages with health information. I'm sure that Dr. Patmos will be talking about that on tomorrow, since his show Medicine and Science airs on Tuesdays, if memory is serving me correctly, and all along those lines. But definitely a lot going on in this space and what folks are talking about, and we'll see what folks have to say about this as well. And the White House has announced the wrongfully detained American teacher Mark Fogel has been released from Russian custody. So that's something else going on in terms of political world of things and all along those lines. And Trump is pushing the plan to take Gaza and relocate Palestinians into the meeting with the Jordan's king. So Trump presses his plan to take over Gaza during meeting with Jordan's King Abdullah II and everything like that. So it definitely looks like he is trying to take over Gaza, maybe put some resorts out there as well. And religious groups are suing Homeland Security over immigration arrests. So 27 religious groups have sued the Trump administration over immigration enforcement policy. And Trump won't block immigration arrests in houses of worship. And now these organizations are countering, because MCUSA joined more than 24 Christian and Jewish denominations and associations suing to protect their religious freedom. And the court has halted on Trump's cuts for medical research that is extended nationwide. So Judge freezes NIH funding cuts nationwide as Pittsburgh universities join the legal challenge in that. So it does look like a lot of legal challenges are happening based on what some of the activities that Trump is doing. So there's even some stunned federal workers, sleeplessness, anger, and tears as folks are talking about the buyout and everything like that. So the judge extended the deadline for federal workers to accept Trump administration's buyout offer and all along those lines. But like I said, I'm going to bring in Sasha Starr. We'll see if anybody else joins us, and we'll definitely see a number of things going on, including Steve Bannon pleading guilty to defrauding donors in the private border wall scheme and all along those lines. But I'll bring in Sasha Starr, see what he's got going on in Canada. It's a rainy day here in North Carolina. All along those lines. But what is your thoughts? Because like I said, I just happened to stumble across that article, the first thing that I mentioned, where I guess Trump was floating out today this notion that it might be not a bad idea for him to have a third term. And apparently he floated that out in some conversations that he was having and everything. And I know he's floated that out there before and everything. And of course, there are folks that are saying that he's whining and moaning about judges blocking his various power grabs. But that would be the ultimate power grab if you are able to have two back-to-back terms, and then the one term that you had, not you, but he had back before Biden came in office. So are we going to have a King Trump? And is he going to have 3 terms or maybe even 4 terms? What's going to go on in this space where he is talking about this notion of wanting to possibly have another term?
I remember during his election, he was arguing that his voters, apparently, that all he asks them to come and vote for him, and this will be their last vote. They will not need votes anymore. So obviously he implied that through certain mechanism somehow he will remain president for much longer than just 4 years. You see, it's all coming to the head during this current presidency. The notion that there are three equal um, branches of um, the in United States, three branches of government, which is a judicial, the Trump's, which is
Executive,
executive powers, and the Congress, which
right,
is
legislative.
formulates the laws and the legislation and budget and so on. So I think this is the very serious mm, trial of this notion, whether it's indeed true or not. First of all, the Supreme Court, which is controlled by conservative judges, which most of them were appointed by Trump, it's already quite iffy whether they're indeed independent part of the governing of the United States. Maybe it's not. Number two, the same Supreme Court gave Trump the immunity for whatever he's doing. That's very important. So he can indeed do, for example, right now, there are certain court orders, including those from the judges appointed by Trump. And Trump may rely on the fact that, number one, they said that the judges, it's not their business to meddle in the governing of the United States. It's not their business. So therefore, whatever they're ruling has no grounds at all. The simple thing is that if they issue an order, so normally if you disobey and you don't oblige to confirm and do exactly this, whatever order is, you should be brought to in front of judge for contempt of court. And if you still are in contempt and you didn't purge, you have to be sent to jail. How are you going to do it with the Trump? On what is the power the judges have over Trump? That's quite unclear. So if that issue cannot be resolved one way or another, then any issue, let's see, his third term, it's very possible because if eventually he has majority in Congress, so they can change constitution in a way that would allow, in certain cases, if a majority of Senate will rule that yes, indeed, the additional term is possible, and the Constitution will provide for it. And to change the Constitution, they need majority of the votes in Senate. So then, third term for Trump is a done deal. It's not. I even don't see how you can prevent that from happening.
It could be a done, yeah, it could be a done deal and everything. Apparently, he is getting some pushback from some organizations and everything. Because I did see that, I guess it was yesterday, 5 former Treasury secretaries were complaining about the power of the Doge and everything like that. Because I guess they were complaining that Doge has too much power, and we're wondering about that. And all along those lines, so 5 former Treasury secretaries were saying that the democracy is under siege. And I was just wondering your take, because you've talked about him a couple of times. Do we really have President Trump, or is Musk the de facto president, and he's really the one running the country and running what's going on? Because he does seem to have a lot of power, and apparently now he has the access to the Treasury department and their numbers and everything like that. So is Trump really the president, or is Elon Musk the president?
I think we have a two-person presidency. Trump is official simply because he was born in the United States.
Right.
So he won the presidential race. So he is de facto president of the United States. However, what he did, because many things what Musk is doing, it's well beyond Trump's capacity. I'm not talking about his age, but his intellectual capacity is not allowed him to do most of the things what Musk and his boys are doing.
Mhm.
So it's very convenient, actually, that Musk is responsible only to Trump. He's not responsible to Congress. He's not responsible to voters, to anybody. So if, as long as he is responsible only to Trump, so if Trump approves everything what Musk is doing, so he may say that, yeah, I appointed Musk
Mhm.
to do certain things, and I'm quite happy with what he's doing. I don't see anything wrong with what he's doing. So this way, it's very elegant way for Trump to do almost anything what he wants, but not with his own hands, which he's not capable to begin with, but also he could be responsible, at least to Congress, maybe to voters, maybe some way or another. So he could be stopped, maybe even halfway, or at least some discussion could be. But there is no discussion about what Musk is doing because he's not responsible to anybody except Trump. So
Mhm.
this is a very, very interesting setup.
It's an interesting situation. Apparently, Musk is investigating all kinds of agencies. I know he's been investigating the pharmaceutical industry, like we were talking about this morning news on World Edition. But apparently, earlier today, FEMA had some issues because after Musk made some claims that they paid to house migrants in luxury New York City hotels, now 4 FEMA employees have been fired over payments to reimburse New York City for those hotel costs. So I guess they're saying that they were paying for the hotels for the migrants there in that large city, New York City, and they've got at least 4 top officials, and we'll see maybe more heads are going to roll in that situation. But it does look like he is culling and trying to figure out who is taking the money out of the system and everything like that. And if he doesn't like what they are using it for, then he might go and get rid of them. And apparently, the Trump administration is also targeting Education Department research arm in their latest cuts. So they want to slash funding for research contracts and grants. So it looks like they didn't have to eliminate the education department, at least not as of yet. They're just decimating part of the divisions and everything, including the one that tracks national school performance and everything like that. So it ought to be fascinating what goes on in that space and along those lines and everything like that. Sashi, we call this show World Politics. I know you usually talk about U.S. politics and everything like that, but I know you brought it up a couple of times and you're not a fan of Trudeau, and I know some others from Canada that aren't fans of him either. But where does the politics of Canada going right now, and what are you folks in Canada talking about politically, and who is at the forefront, and who will be possibly running the country? Since I know Trudeau, I don't think can run again and everything. So where is Canadian politics standing, and how are you going to deal with Trump saying that he wants y'all to be the 51st state?
You see, the Canadians, they are involved in internal politics of Canada and each provinces and so on, but Canadians are now united against Trump and, unfortunately, United States in terms that there is very difficult hidden boycott of all American products in Canada.
Yeah.
People refuse to buy American products, and even those who are indifferent to this, but they're checking out who is a producer of certain goods. And if its producer is United States, they refuse to buy. They buy alternative, either Canadian products or those, if it's a food products, those that came from anywhere from South America or Central America, or even like if it's oranges and this type of stuff from Israel, for example. They're
Right.
buying this stuff. Normally, majority of this was produced by Los Angeles, by California, so to speak. They are no longer buying anything coming from California. Um, so this is immediate, and it's now in second or even third week, and it's going on. There is no stop to it. They stopped buying even American-produced cars, even though partially these cars are produced in Canada, by the way, in Ontario. There are a lot of cars produced in Ontario. No, now they're buying Japanese cars, German cars, any cars but made by United States, even with participation of Canada. So there is a certain effect which will be heard and felt maybe a month from now or so on. Now, Canada is on a political front. Canada is, I think there is a big delegation is now going to Europe to take part in the Munich conference,
Right.
and they are trying to have bridges and develop a trade with European Union. They are even trying to see if and if yes and how Canada could join European Union. And it seems to me that what Trump did, I think it in a long term it will. I think it will backfire on Trump quite a
The
bit.
thing about things that might backfire and everything, I know that both past administrations were accused of what I'm getting ready to mention and everything like that in different ways, whether it was through Ukraine or whether it was through Russia or a number of other things. But apparently, earlier today, Trump halted the prosecution of corporate firms being accused of bribery abroad. So I imagine that a lot of companies will be getting bribes from the different countries and everything because Trump signed an order pausing the enforcement of foreign bribery bans. So before, I guess companies were getting bribes from Russia and North Korea and a number of other players that are in the area. But now it looks like Trump has given a green light to corporate corruption. So I'm thinking that a lot of people and even some people that we might not be friendly with, meaning North America in general, can now take out their wallet and try to bribe the corporations, whether they're bribing GlaxoSmithKline, or whether they're bribing Pfizer, or whether they're bribing General Motors or whoever else they might want to bribe. So are we going to see a rush in bribery now that we have seen that they're not going to prosecute the firms accused of bribery abroad? And I know that that was an issue both with Hunter Biden and the whole Biden family, definitely the last Trump term and everything, because there have definitely been a number of countries that were trying to buy influence. And it looks like Trump has opened the door for them to come in. As long as you want to open your checkbook, then he's willing to take the money.
Um, you know probably that Musk built enormous high-tech center, with huge data centers in Tennessee. It has enormous capacity, and it seems to me that what he'd like to do, and he may just succeed, by the way,
Mhm.
to transfer all business of United States government and education and just almost any agency or all agencies to this data center that would provide in time information on who's doing what financial transactions, and there will be red flags all over the. Now, if you succeed, then the next stage will be all U.S. Large businesses like same General Motors or Microsoft, or it doesn't matter what, will become part of that system. So they finances and everything what they're doing will be under giant microscope, and there will be no possibility of them function without raising red flags that Musk will put according to his understanding of the situation. And that will be basically the end of America as we know it. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. Not at all. Maybe it's a good thing because everything will be under giant microscope. So
Mhm.
all this bribes or irregular payments or anything. In fact, there will be almost cashless
Right.
society of these companies and U.S. government itself. Everything will be under the monitoring from Musk and his people. So essentially, Musk will become much more than president of the United States. Will be
Mhm.
almost a semi-god. That
Almost like an emperor or something like that. You know, one of the other things that was in the news, and I know it's been in the news for a few days, Sasha, and everything, is this notion. I mean, it's been almost 60 years since he was assassinated, but apparently the FBI is saying it found 2,400 new JFK assassination records, and they are, I guess, going to look at this. And I know that Trump's been talking about it, and of course, he's trying to get RFK to be one of his health officials and everything like that. But is there anything new out there? Are we going to find out that the shooter that we've always given the credit for being the assassin was not the assassin, or that the government was more involved? But what is your take? You were in Russia or the Soviet Union at one point and everything, and I'm sure they talked about not just the space war, but the American politics and all along those lines. So, is there some secrets that we didn't know that we're about to find out almost 60 years later in these alleged documents that are out there?
Could be, but I think it's all irrelevant by now because most
Mm.
of the people are probably dead or
Right.
about to be dead. So, in practicality, there were a lot of improprieties and maybe crimes and
Mm.
anything. Then, how it will affect us today, how it will affect our life one way or another, it's unclear to me. It's quite interesting from history buffs and to
Yeah.
find out something was hidden for so many years or so on. But practically, it will not affect us at all.
It won't affect us at all. And like I said, it's just one of those things that, as you said, history buffs get into, and they're always curious about what the new history buff thing is, and all along those lines. Getting off politics just for a second, but still staying in the differences of countries and all along those lines. How do y'all in LA, I mean, not LA, how do y'all in Canada and definitely y'all in other countries you've been living in deal with people that are doing threats? Because apparently LA County teens and got accused and are getting prison time for what they call serial swatting, which means that you put out a fake threat of bombs or shooting and all along those lines. So a teen who made hundreds of these threats was sentenced to 4 years in prison. That doesn't sound like a long time to be putting all those people at jeopardy and everything like that and all in that space. But I just wondered in Canada if somebody puts out a fake alarm, or even when you were in the Soviet Union, if somebody put out a fake alarm, how did y'all deal with those situations, or did they get long prison terms or no prison terms at all? Because that just seems unfair to me that you might put people in jeopardy saying that there's a bomb in the theater, and apparently they did several of these, and all they got was a couple of years.
Yeah, of course, it's a criminal offense. It should be punished, and it is punished. I'm not sure about how long one should be sent to prison, but obviously it's a punishable offense. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about that.
I agree. It should be punishable offense and everything. I mentioned that there was a reporter, and I know that you've talked about him before, but apparently he's out now. I guess Trump did some negotiations. So, can you tell me about this journalist that was apparently in Russia who has now been freed and all along those lines? I did see Nick popped in earlier, and Kim is with us now, so she may join in the conversation at some point or another. But I just wanted what you knew about Mark Fogel, who apparently was a teacher, not a journalist, but a teacher who has finally been released from Russian custody after having been there for a number of years and everything. So apparently he had a talk with one of the Trump envoys after he got this release and everything. So they're saying he was wrongfully detained there in Russia, and now I guess he's on his way back home and everything like that if he's not already home. But what do you know about, and are there other Americans that are trapped in Russia, maybe in those gulags and prisons that used to be there and I guess are still there? So are there other folks that are in that space?
I must say that I never heard even this name, and today was the first time that I ever heard about that. It's good that he was released, of course, and other Americans who were there, they should be released unless they committed some serious crimes, or they maybe they were trying to kill Putin, for example. So in this case, I don't think that they will be released anytime soon. But unless they were trying to commit killing of Putin or some other top officials in Russia, but I don't think that's the case. On the other hand, I believe that at these times, say starting in 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine, I don't think that America have any business to conduct and travel to Russia specifically. And I think United States have to actually make announcement. You see, in Canada, for example, there is a rule that if you are going to a country of your birth,
Right.
you have some problems with the law in that country and you were detained or anything would happen to you, Canadian government is not in a position to help you. You have to try to help yourself. Canadian government in a place where you were born. So if you were born somewhere, let's say in Somalia, and
Mhm.
you're traveling to Somalia, it's your own business. It's your risks that you're taking, and Canada is not in any way going to help you. Same thing is anybody who were born let's see, in Afghanistan. You
Mhm.
travel to Afghanistan and you get into some troubles. Sorry, my friend, that was your risk. It was your decision, and nobody is going to help. That's I don't know if US if it's the same thing or
Yeah,
what.
I don't think you guys have that same policy. Maybe it should be a policy. I've got friends of mine that have traveled back to their respective countries. As a matter of fact, one of my friends just came back because I saw him on Saturday. So he just came back from one of the African nations. I can't remember which one it is right now, but he has gone back home. And when I was talking to Osei, he told me that he would probably be now starting to be half and half. So half the time back in his homeland on one of the African countries and the other time here in the United States. So instead of being bi-coastal, he'll be bicontinental and all along those lines. I've heard other people that have done that as well, and I've talked to some people that have definitely gone back to their respective countries. As a matter of fact, one of our leading restaurants here in Durham is a Zimbabwean restaurant, and the gentleman that owns it is our mayor, but his wife is from Zimbabwe, so they've actually got some ties where they go back and forth to Zimbabwe. So we are seeing more and more people that have like dual citizenships and all those kind of things like that. But I think usually they are responsible and have to be aware of whatever they're going back to in their country. I know Kim's in the background, and maybe she'll come off the background, depending on what she's got going on. But I know the last couple of weeks, or even definitely the last couple of days, she's been talking about this notion that we need to work to be better as a society, just in general, and try to protect ourselves and all along those lines. And apparently, there is a new poll that is out, and I'm curious what you guys say about it, but it's called the U.S. Corruption Perception Index Score. And apparently the U.S. has slipped to a new low in international corruption index. So corruption is worse than it's been in over a decade in many nations, according to this survey that came out earlier today. And of course, corruption is derailing the climate fight, and Watchdog organization is warning, and corruption is fueling environmental crime and impunity across the region and around the world. So I know we've got some people on this network that are very plugged into the international scene. I know you've got some international ties and have some places, both you and your wife, overseas. Are we just seeing more corruption in the world in your mind, Sasha? Because, like I said, when I saw that we slipped to a new low in international corruption, and part of that may be the election of Trump, but definitely we've got a new low, and it's looked like the arrow is steadily going down. So is the world just becoming a more corrupt place?
Well, if you take an example of United States, where a convicted felon becoming president of the country, so what one can talk about the corruption? I mean, there is no more corruption than to have a convicted criminal becoming a president of the country. I'll
Yes.
stop right there. There is nothing more to say.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. I mentioned earlier when we were doing the morning news that they found, and I'm like I said, I'm thinking they were dud bombs and everything, but you've lived in the Soviet Union. Of course, we're hearing this even sometimes in Ukraine and everything. How concerned do our kids need to be about, particularly if they are in war-torn zones, about this possibility that they might be playing in an area that has got landmines? Because, like I reported earlier, there are more than 175 World War II bombs that they've literally found underneath a playground. And like I said, I'm imagining that hopefully they were not able to be detonated and they found them before anything could happen. But I'm always been concerned about that. This notion that unexploded bombs could be literally in very friendly environments, whether that's a playground, whether that's a church or whatever. But you've traveled the world and you lived in the Soviet Union. You were born in Ukraine. How concerned were you about, even as a child, about being accidentally stumbled across something that you didn't intend to stumble across that was explosive?
Oh, fortunately, nothing of that happened to me.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I probably wouldn't talk to you today.
Yeah.
And well, this is a danger of being in a country which was torn by war, and that's additional risk that people are taking visiting these countries or
Mhm.
living in that countries, and there is very little you can do about it.
Yeah, there's very little you can do about that. I know that tomorrow at 1 o'clock we'll be doing your other show, which is Modern Investment. And I know you've been a big fan of NVIDIA and everything like that. But I just wondering, outside of NVIDIA, because apparently Google Pixel 9a is about to come out in every color, and well, various colors, I don't know about every color and everything like that. Excuse me. And of course, people are talking about these different AI tools and everything like that. So outside of NVIDIA, what are some other businesses that you think people should be looking at just in the possibility of making some money? Because even Apple is warning iPhone users to update their devices because a security breach recently happened, and all along those lines. But what are some other NVIDIA that you would be looking at? Because even with NVIDIA, they're saying that the RDX 5090 power connectors, which I guess is part of NVIDIA, are melting and everything like that. So what would you be looking at as an investment?
See, NVIDIA has more or less political problem.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that the president and major shareholder of NVIDIA, Jensen, he didn't bow to Trump enough to show that he is kissing his hand, and Elon Musk's as well. Although I must admit that Elon Musk is using a lot of NVIDIA products simply because there is no alternative. But in my view, NVIDIA is now much riskier bet, just for that one reason. There are some other reasons too, but the other reasons are not so evident as this one. He is not in Musk's and Trump close team. Even Zuckerberg, who settled the lawsuit and paid Trump $35 million, and he kissed the ring. Even he is not. There are a lot of people convincing Trump that he was not sincere enough. So he's saying that he supports Trump and Musk and so on, but he has not been sincere enough. So he has to keep him a little bit at distance and wait until there will be more evidence of his sincerity. Right now, it's not enough.
One of our founders just mentioned that they might be attending an NVIDIA conference in the not too distant future. What questions would you want to know from NVIDIA going forward if they are able to get their hands on one of the NVIDIA executives and everything like that? Because they seem to be heading toward a conference. I have no idea what the conference is, but I imagine that some of the leaders will be around. So if you, Sasha, were able to ask the NVIDIA executives a question, what would you want to know from NVIDIA?
Okay, I would like to ask a question that NVIDIA relies majorly and lion's share of their sales and profits coming from a few large companies like Meta, Google, a few others. And what if they will run across alternative supplier who may not be even as good as NVIDIA? Maybe that supplier will have some cheaper products or some other threats from there was a Chinese company, existing one that make a lot of noise a couple of weeks ago. But the others who may appear in the near future, how NVIDIA will be able to protect its revenue and profits.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of protecting revenues and profits and all along those lines, power outages seem to happen regularly, and sometimes they can impact folks, including impacting those of us that have young people in our lives. In your case, it might be your grandkids and maybe even some of your kids that are in that 30, 40 range, because I can't remember how old your personal kids are and everything like that. But a lot of people, whether they are millennials, Gen X, and definitely those that are the younger people that are teenagers like my nephews, are included in the PlayStation and some of these other gaming worlds. And apparently Sony had to apologize yesterday because there was a major network kudfu or a mistake where a lot of those kids weren't able to play because they were out of power for about 24 hours and everything like that. So I just wanted your take on how protected is the energy grid just in general, because I'm thinking that even as an investor that probably has, and PlayStation is a major gaming company that gets a lot of investment money from investors and all along those lines, that's got to hurt a business just like it hurt Texas when they went off the grid and everything. So what is your take when these things happen that knock people off the grid and cause these global outages?
Well, PlayStation is owned by Sony. Sony is a very capable company, and they run tremendous business all across the board. Their stock is doing quite well. And be concerned about being off the grid. This is not Sony's problem to solve it. I don't think the Sony would be able to do anything about that. So I think it's a local providers of electricity. They have actually electricity is another a big item on Canada U.S. trades because U.S. is getting a lot of electricity from Canada and especially from uh, Ontario and even more so from Quebec. And there is something when I looked at the retaliation ideas from Canada, electricity was one of the first areas where Canada would strike back. More evidence needed about the issue of water, the fresh water that Canada has in abundance. In fact, its country number one in the world as the fresh water is concerned. And U.S. is using a lot of fresh water from Canada. So that's another area where Canada could strike back. I think Trump probably is beginning now to understand what a mistake he made by threatening Canada, probably Mexico as well, because Mexico is also doing tremendous car business with the United States and vegetables and fruits and many other things. Um, I think that the part of the conference in Europe will be European Union countries which will decide how effectively deal with the possible threats from Trump concerning new tariffs and so on. They are going to discuss it. And there could be even united front, which will include European countries and Canada as well, if not Mexico. I'm not sure about that to deal with these Trump-infused threats.
Yeah. One of the things that me and Kim were surprised by when we went to that conference down in Florida and everything was the amount of media companies that are coming in and out of Canada. Because, like I said, I think Kim mentioned that she had seen a number, and I met some as well, Canadian TV executives that were there, including some that had their companies. I think the producers of the event were actually out of Canada. Banff, I believe, is their name and everything. But is that something that you've observed that Canada has a vibrant media society, whether it's their own streaming things and things like that, that are getting some major investments? Because, like I said, we were not as aware until we went down there. And I know she ran into a bunch of Canadians, and I did run into some as well.
Yeah. Canada has thriving scene, and apparently, few people are aware of that. Most of the American movies, a lot of them are being produced in Canada, because probably the cost factor is
Right.
very important in this. But Canada has facilities, especially Vancouver, Toronto, Quebec. They
Hmm.
have fantastic, up-to-date facilities, and plus the cost because Canadian dollar is today around 70 cents US, so that can save Americans a lot of money to produce full-scale movies.
Yep, and I knew Canada was definitely doing that and everything. You know, we just had the Super Bowl, but the other sport that is very popular around this time of the year here in the U.S. is NASCAR. I think the Indy is getting ready to come up, and a number of other big race cars are coming up as well. I've never been sure in terms of sports because I know y'all are big into hockey and big into some other sports, but did race car driving ever take off in Canada? And if so, how is it doing? Is it like a particular area like Montreal or Calgary that is doing really well, or are y'all too
Yeah,
cold and not really trying to have a lot of car races, or is car racing really taking off there in the area, whether it's stock cars or whether it's Indy type cars?
no, it's quite popular. Of course, you probably have to be careful about the weather in Canada.
Hmm.
It's not all year round facilities. It's not like in Florida when you can have car races like twice a day. Now in Canada it's different, but starting I think May, there will be for a few months. There will be very good conditions for car racing. They're quite popular, especially in Montreal. I think they're very popular in Montreal. Toronto is in second place. Vancouver probably in third, I would say.
Yep. Because I know Toronto also has some good minority ownership. I want to say one of the owners of the Toronto basketball team may be from one of the African nations, if I remember correctly, and all along those lines. And I know the same with the guy that owns the Minnesota Vikings. By the way, Kim was saying that of the people that she met, 90% of them were from Canada. And I thought it was that many people that she met that were Canadians, whether they were doing a car show or whether they were doing a show around comics or a number of other things as well. And she was saying that Canada is suffering from budget cuts and not so much America and all along those lines. Um, I think I asked this earlier, but I didn't really get a clear answer. Who is going to take over Canada's government in your mind, or what you're hearing in terms of the polls now that Trudeau will not be in charge? So, who will be running Canadian government, and will they have a good relationship with Trump, or will they have a bad relationship, whether they're coming from the left or the right? So what is your take as to which direction your country is going to go leadership wise in y'all's election? Because I think y'all's election comes up in the springtime, or late summer.
Yeah, well, first of all, the Liberal Party must have their own election to elect the leader, since
Right.
Trudeau is no longer the leader of. So right now they don't have any leaders. They have to elect the leader of Liberal Party. Once that's done, then there will be federal election anytime soon after that. And it seems to me that Progressive Conservative Party will win this election, and Poilievre will become the next Prime Minister of Canada. It appears to be so. Again, you cannot be sure 100%, but so far it definitely appears that way.
Well, the big issue here, at least everybody claims that was the big issue, was the pocketbook issue. So, like, whether you could afford your groceries or afford your gas and everything like that. Is that the same thing in Canada, where most people are concerned about their kind of like their day to day living and everything? And of course, a lot of people were talking about those social issues and to some degree education as well. So, what are the issues that most of the candidates are running it on there in Canada?
It's very unclear. It will be obviously part of the election, where every party will announce more or less. Because you see, in between the election, yeah, people are unhappy about certain things, but
Right.
it's not taking level as in the United States. Um, there are no demonstrations of any kind. There is no mm, kind of uproar of public opinion that something has to be stopped and so on. Even if you take, I remember a few months ago there were protests on campuses, the Palestinian type of protest, both in Canada and United States. But Canada, they were almost like they were doing that. Of course, well, we all know that all these protesters they're being paid to protest. So some protesters were very happy to take the money, and they would appear just to be there. So to say, okay, I was paid, I came, I left. Okay, so there's no such viciousness as this protest, like similar to United States. By the way, Mark, where are all these protesters? Remember Palestine from the river to the sea, and all those people who were protesting and fighting. Where are all
There's
these?
there's still two major protests. I think I mentioned on one of our shows. So I mentioned yesterday that 50-51 took place. Actually, ironically, well, me and Kim were in Florida, but it was 50 states, I think 50 separate cities on one day, and they were protesting a number of things, including the Trump election and some of these Trump policies and some of these executive orders. I know that Reverend Barber is launched back the Moral Monday protest. I think he might have done one or two, and I think there's one that, if you remember, Zach, that used to be on our network, told me that he went to one. I guess it was either last week or a week or so ago, and there's supposed to be another one coming up. I think on the 17th. Yeah, it's supposed to be taking place on President's Day. So there are still protesters out there. Some of them are doing it on their own. Some of them are independent. Some of them on both the right and the left, like the MAGA supporters, as well as those that might be more on the left and everything, are getting money from, as you say, people that are funding them, but not everybody is doing it. A lot of these are grassroots protests. What I was going to tell David Walker yesterday when he did not know about the protests was sometimes they don't intend for you to know about them because they are done through social media, and you're not even supposed to know that they are taking place until you gather there and you have these type of protests. Because that's the impression I got from Zach with terms of what happened about a week or a week and a half ago, was it was put out by our young people on social media, and they came and raised some protests, and there are still people out there that are not pleased with what Israel is doing and not pleased with Hamas either. So there are protests in a number of organizations and everything like that. So those protests are out there. You might not be seeing them as much in the news because one of the things that me and Kim learned is that a lot of our young people really couldn't give a crap about CBS, ABC, or Fox. They'd rather listen to social media and make their causes and their claims off of social media versus making it in the traditional media. So I think that those of us that are over 60, and I'm over 60, or those that are in their 80s or 90s may be missing what some of these kids are doing. They might be smart the way that the 60s and the 70s kids were that Rick talks about in the way that they are handling their protests. So don't think that they're not happening, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Oh, Mark, with all due respect, the protests that, let's say, they're claiming Palestine from the river to the sea. And nobody knows about this. So they're hiding somewhere behind the social media or whatever, and they're nowhere to be seen. Nobody is talking about that. Then what's the meaning of these protests?
Well, like I said, we're not seeing it. I didn't say that they weren't being seen. Some of these are getting millions of views and are definitely making some noise and are definitely even changing the minds of some of their
You're
young
saying that,
people.
but they're very quiet because they don't, of course, they don't want to be prosecuted.
They
So,
don't want to be they don't
yeah,
want to be prosecuted, and it's kind of like rebel kind of protest. I mean, rebel protests have been going on as I mean, how many people knew or were supposed to know about Harriet Tubman? Harriet Tubman got people out of slavery because she was doing it in a revolutionary kind of secret kind of way. So there sometimes revolutions aren't always out in your face the way that it is with Ukraine and some of the other ones and everything. And sometimes it's also a nature of you go into an environment that you don't know. In my mind, that's what happened in Vietnam. We went to an environment that we were not familiar with, and that's why they kind of, in my mind, kicked our backside and everything like that. So there's a number of things that can go on place in war and protest, and you know that just in general. As I told you before, and it's the way because my parents came out of the protest movement in the '60s and everything, and that's where I first heard that saying that one man's freedom fighter. So somebody may like ANC and somebody else may consider the ANC, which was the African National Congress, to be terrorists and all along those lines. So one man's freedom fighter is another man's hero. And the same with this notion of imperial powers, because the other poster that I used to see that I used to love with this notion of a man basically being squashed by the globe because he was trying to do that whole Atlas thing. But some of the powers that be were squashing him down, be that France, be that England, be that a number of others, because I vaguely remember that poster and I'm trying to visualize it in my head right now and everything.
Mark, I don't have any problems to understand for example, aspirations of American people that they would protest for against the Vietnam War. That's
Mhm.
very obvious, or against slavery, for example,
Mhm.
some other obvious things. But when American people are protesting about war in Israel and Gaza, and most of these people, they have nothing to do with this Israelis or Palestinians or just anything, and they're just coming there as a money grab. They're,
But Sasha, did you have a problem with people protesting against South Africa? Most of the people that protested against apartheid never lived in South Africa. They just thought there was an injustice, and there are some people that feel. What I'm not saying that they're right or wrong. Can be argued on both sides, but there are some people that feel that Israel, particularly Zionist type of Israel, did some corrupt things in Israel against some of the people that are of Arab background and all along those lines. So there are people that will protest, and they don't have to be from there. I mean, a number of the people that protested against apartheid, and like I've told you before, some of the people that support Ukraine. I support Ukraine. I've never lived in Ukraine. I've only been to Europe. Well, I think when I lived in Turkey, I might have stepped in Europe one time, but I also know that Putin is wrong in what he's doing. So therefore, I back the Ukrainian folks. I don't think you have to live someplace to back someplace. You can just see an injustice, and I think that that's there are people that get paid to do it, whether they're on the right or the left. But there are some people that it's their principles, and they think that it is wrong what Israel is doing and things like that. And I can't argue. One man's principle might not be the same as another man's principles. That's just
okay, I'll tell you something very interesting. I saw yesterday a movie which was produced in Ukraine about Ukrainian fighters on the front lines and what they are doing, what techniques they are inventing right on
right.
the front lines. And they have incredible experience to produce, for example, drones They have drones that nobody in the world has anything similar. For example, some drones they developed and they use it. That a person who operates the drone, he can see the other, for example, soldier, and they showed one was following the soldier, Russian soldier who went to toilet, and the drone was following him, and he could on his screen to see not only the soldier, but he could see his face,
Mhm.
and and he was actually shooting at some point. So what's interesting is that, for example, he was talking, and okay, so this guy, I will take his photo, his picture, but should I do it before he will visit the toilet or after he will come out of toilet? So what's the best thing to do? He said, "Okay, I'll let him use toilet, and then I will take a good shot of him after the toilet, and then I'll kill him."
But,
So,
but some of these, but Sasha, some of these things are not new. I mean, my cousin was in the military during the era of the Shah of Iran, and there were times that U.S. soldiers literally were able to get shots of the leader of that country at the time, literally on his golden toilet and all along those lines. And there was even times where people were being, I think Chris Greco has told me that they have literally seen some of our quote unquote enemies in a compromising position and all along those lines, and they either opted or were ordered not to take them out because they have seen them. So, I mean, you know this, you were in the Soviet army. That this has been going on
uh,
for a while.
but one thing is when you're talking about American produced drones and technique which required. But another thing, what Ukrainians are doing right on the front lines, they
Mm-hmm.
don't have the labs, factories, or anything to produce it. They're doing right with their own hands, using some primitive devices like old cameras, for example, and
But
there's
isn't but
human.
Sasha, isn't that kind of what people said about and I'm not saying I've known some people of this background, just like I know people of all kinds of backgrounds and everything, but that's what people said about the Vietnamese was because they had access to bamboo and knew what to do with some of the material in their particular country, that we were attacked because they knew those they had the better knowledge of those resources. The same thing as we said of some of the African countries. So people have, for decades and centuries and millennial, used some of the technology they've had, including old technology, in order to advance it. So yes, I admire what the Ukrainians have done, but I also know that people have used those resources in the past and found ways to maneuver weapons that people might not expect. And I think that's part of what happened in Vietnam. That's definitely what happened in some of the African nations, even way far back in the colonial ages when there was that whole conversation about imperialism.
Mark, I can agree with you on that, but one thing is that we learn something about this situations. Another thing, when you see it on your screen,
That's true.
how they're watching this Russian fortification, how the one man is walking to a toilet, and then he comes out of the toilet and he shows his face.
Yeah.
Then he shows his face once he shoots and kills him. He shows how his face is changing.
Oh yeah. Like,
This is absolutely spectacular
no,
because something like that is.
yeah. No, it's spectacular. And like I said, you see these things, and I've seen them in some other war environments. But yeah, it's totally spectacular. But the technology has always been fascinating to me. Like I said, I'm not and I know this is off the topic, but there are a lot of people that were loving these bathrooms out there where you see the bathroom, like you see the toilet, you physically see the toilet. But then if you go in the toilet, you turn the switch, and then it's supposed to put a haze so you can do your business and nobody sees you. But I've always wondered about that because that technology is supposed to work, but doesn't always work. Like if you hit that switch, you might think that you are protected and the foam has gone over the screen and nobody's watching you take care of your business. But if it's a public environment and the machine isn't working, then you're just exposed and you've got your stuff out there and being embarrassed looking with people at an art museum while you're taking a shit. But hey, that can happen if the machine doesn't work.
I think it would be great if this short movie of the soldier that I've just told you about,
Mhm.
it could be sent to Russia, to his mother or
Oh yeah.
wife or children. These are the last minute and a half of a life of your beloved husband, the brother, or whatever he is. And if there would be a lot of it, and a lot of it would reach Russia and published there, so people would be aware of what's in reality happening on Ukrainian front.
No,
Because on one in combat, Russians cannot comparable, even close to Ukrainian. So in combat, uh, let's see, a soldier against soldier, it's 99%
no,
Ukrainians.
no. As I recall, there was some, and then we get ready to wrap up the show because we got Mama Noni coming up shortly and everything. But as I recall, then doing the Olympic movement, and there's still the Olympic movement because the Olympics have been going on forever. There were a couple of famous boxers. You would know them better than I do, but I do remember there were some famous boxers that came from the Ukraine, including some that took on and had success against some of our top American boxers, including like Michael Spinks and Muhammad Ali. But I do remember Ukrainians have always had a strong presence in the boxing world and have been good fighters for a number of decades, particularly in the Olympic boxing realm. So I've always known the people of your stock to be good in the fighting realm, and I've known that ever since following the Olympics back in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark, and hopefully Ukraine will remain forever. And what I would like to say at the end is glory to Ukraine. With Trump or without Trump, or one way or another, glory to Ukraine and its fighters.
Yes, glory to them, and definitely support them in their efforts and all along those lines. I know tomorrow at 1 o'clock we'll have the discussion around investment with you and Milan, and maybe Jim E will be joining us as well. But it should be a great conversation where you'll be giving people some financial advice as well. So looking forward to that. Always good to have conversation with you, and we'll be back on World Edition and some of the other shows later on.
Thank you, Mark. Bye bye,
So,
everybody.
Hey.
I have an